So, speaking of imaginary, I know you guys have seen this before, where I equals I. Yeah, duh, right? I equals I. And then I squared equals negative 1. Okay, and then I to the third power equals negative I, and I to the fourth equals 1. So what the heck? How do they get this? How do they get this? Well, when you're taking a look at the square root of a negative number, let's say the square root of negative 9. We know that there's a real part and there's a 9, and then there's also a negative 1. So we just break it up into its factors. So we have negative 1, right, times 9. Doesn't that equal the same thing? Yeah, of course. So then we break this up and say, okay, this is the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 9. Okay, the square root of negative 1, that's where we get the I from. Okay, so up here, I know I is also equal to the square root of negative 1, but we're not looking at it in that sense. But if you were to square this, like go like this and square it, you eliminate the radical. That's why right here, I squared just equals negative 1. You see that? That's how they ended up getting to this point right here. And so anyways, whenever we're dealing with an imaginary, like a variable, the I, and then it's raised to a certain power, this sequence just repeats. So this is I to the first, second, third, fourth, and then up here it goes 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, right? So each of these, it's always going to be 1 on every fourth exponent. So see if you guys could take a second and figure out what I to the 13th would be. So how I usually do this, if you're stuck, is I look at this and say, okay, well, I know 12 is a fact, right? 12 and 4 kind of go hand in hand. So 12 would be right here, so 13 would then be right there. Does that make sense? All right, so anywho, good luck with that. So let's try simplifying some of these radicals. So this right here, how do we simplify this? How do we simplify this? This. So I know normally we would say, hey, we can't do this because we've got a negative underneath the radical, but I want you to give it a shot. Take a few minutes, work with the people around you, and see if you guys could get these simplified. All right, so the first one's real basic. You just have the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 2. Square root of negative 1 is I, and then you have radical 2. Now over here, the square root of 12, negative 12, you have the square root of negative 1 times the square root of, well, 4 times the square root of 3, right? Square root of 4 is 2. The square root of 3 we can't take. But then the square root of negative 1 is I. So we put the I right there. Okay, that's how you simplify this. Now over here we have the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 36. So that's going to be 6, and then that's going to be I. So that's how we write those. How do we do up there? All right, now here it says write this in the form of a complex number where it's a plus bi. So I see that this is going to be the real part, the 7. Okay, so I'm going to put that first, and then the bi right here, this, I have to simplify the square root of 18. So 18 is the same as 9 times 2, right? And then I have times negative 1 to get that. So the square root of negative 1 is I. The square root of 9 is going to be 3, and I can't take the square root of 2, so it's just going to stay like so. So now I'm going to add this to this. So I've got plus 3i radical 2. That's how you complete that one. Okay? All right, moving on. How about right here? These ones are a little bit more tricky. Okay, and the reason why is because a lot of you guys don't realize, oh no, these aren't the tricky ones. These ones are easy. All you're going to do is just combine like terms. Okay, we could do those ones. You could do them on your own. Okay, down here, these are the tricky ones. These are tricky because you have to multiply I times I. Now, I times I is going to give you I squared, which is negative 1. So, take a second, try number 5. All right, so over here, we have 12 times 7, which is going to give us 84. And we have I times I, which is I squared. I squared equals negative 1. So we have 84 times negative 1, which would give us negative 84. Okay? Over on this side, we have to use FOIL. So 6 times 4, that's 24. 6 times negative 3i is going to be negative 18i. And then you have this middle term right here, the two inner terms, that's going to be negative 20i. and then you have these last terms, which is going to be a positive 15i squared. Combine the like terms, so we have 24, negative 18i negative 20i. So these two guys, you can combine these. So that's going to be, what is that going to be? Negative 38i. Okay? And then lastly, we've got something crazy right here. Notice that this is 15 times I squared, which is negative 1, right? The I squared is negative 1, so that's going to be a negative 15. Alright, so I color coordinated the ones that are like terms. Obviously, these are like terms. This one is not because it has the I. So 24 minus 15, I think that gives me 9. So 9 minus 38i. Okay, that's how you do that. Same deal with this one. So use the distributive property, and then in the end, we get 43 minus 24i. Let's move on. Alright, so what this slide is saying is basically this. Let me sum it up. If you have radical negative 2, okay, times the square root of negative 3, does it equal this? Negative 2 times negative 3. Right? So is this true? That's basically what that slide was just saying. So that's the big question. So why don't you guys talk real quick, see if this will equal the same thing. Alright, well first off, if I have radical 2 times radical 3, you could just multiply. So this is the same as 2 times 3, which is the square root of 6. Okay, so it's legal to do that as long as it's multiplication. If it was addition, you couldn't do that. So let's try this. Over here, negative 2 times negative 3, that's going to just be positive 6, right? So will this equal positive 6? Well, before we multiply, we have to take care of this negative, right, on the inside. So this is the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 2, right? So that one's going to be I radical 2. And then this one in the same story, right, is negative 1 times the square root of 3, which will be I radical 3. Now we just multiply these two things, and so you've got I squared, and then radical 2 times radical 3, I did it over here, is just going to be radical 6. Now what is the I squared going to give us? A negative. So we have the square root of 6 on this side, and then we have negative square root of 6 on that side. So obviously these ones are not equal. So just watch out for that. Whenever you have a negative, just you gotta branch it out like this and pull out the I before you start to do any other operation. Okay? Alright, so let's try to solve this. So since this is an equation, all we're going to do is just get the variable by itself. So the first step is I need to get rid of this 54. Subtract 54 from both sides. Right? Then I'm looking at this. To get rid of the 9, I divide both sides by 9. And then I have x squared equals negative 6. How do you undo a square? Well, you have to take the square root. So whenever I take the square root of a variable, I have to put plus or minus, and then I have a negative 6. Now before, right, I've been training you guys that this is bad, okay? And that's only bad whenever we're talking about domain, because we can't have imaginary numbers for the values of x. We can't plot that on a coordinate plane. However, we can simplify this and say that our answer is just going to be imaginary. And so this is what the imaginary number would look like. We pull out that negative 1 like this, and then we know that that's going to equal I. So then that would be your final answer. Okay? And everything's pretty much as simple as that. Okay? It just gets a little bit more, problems that you're used to. This is like an Algebra 1 problem. Alright, so why don't you guys pick one. Pick either A, B, or C, and try to solve those as a class. Okay, part A, I got plus or minus 4i. Part B, I got plus or minus I radical 30. And then C, I got plus or minus 1/2 I. So how'd you guys hold up there? Do alright? Good. Are you really responding to me as I ask you guys questions? Because that'd be kind of silly, right? Because I'm not really there.